Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans. Freddie Slater's mid-season GB3 debut and Rafa Camara versus Taponen were only some of the storylines playing out this week. We also had Robin Räikkönen's international karting debut and the prep race for the Karting World Championship. So lots of things to get through, and as always we begin with a quick karting update. We begin with the WSK Super Cup, a one-round championship, and here I do want to highlight the mini categories as they are not yet part of the FIA stuff. And here in the mini under 10s, we had Joël Pujol taking the win, stealing it across the line, but he is really not the driver I do want to highlight. Instead, it is Nicolo Perico and Mason Robertson, who are, in my opinion, really the stars of the class. Always managed to find a way to fight for the win. Robertson had to fight from, pretty far back down the order and fought his way into the lead battle. And then Nicolo Perico is just a lock-in to be fighting for the win every single race he competes in, pretty much. So in this class, he is really the one you want to keep an eye on. There was also Robin Räikkönen giving his international karting debut in this class this weekend. And of course, it is only his, I believe, second year of competition after running Rotax Switzerland last season. And obviously he's very, very young, so there isn't anything to read into just yet. But I thought it was worth pointing out. He didn't really do anything noteworthy. He was sort of stuck down the field. But then again, this is a pretty competitive pack for the class, and for reference he was fighting against some of the DKM frontrunners, so the German mini karting championship, the DMKM I suppose it is to be entirely accurate. Either way, a pretty good run all things considered. In the mini group 3s, we can do this a lot quicker because here it's really just one name you definitely need to know, and it is DML Daniel Miron Lorente, the, I believe, half Spanish, half Dutch driver, and he once again pulled off a great last lap move for the win. He can win under pretty much any conditions. He was leading most of the race, but as it is, you can lose the lead at some stage, but he got it back at the perfect timing. And yeah, took yet another title to his name, which adds to a pretty long list despite his pretty young age. So that's a name you do want to remember. Then we had the Champions of the Futures, the 5th round of this particular series, which, in case you aren't aware, it sort of runs together with the FIA European Championship. It does rounds before all of the FIA European Championship rounds at the same tracks, acts as a bit of a practice race usually, and then here they extended their championship by one additional round to also be the practice race for the upcoming World Championship next week at PFI in the UK. And here with the juniors, we had a very chaotic day, all things considered, as is tradition really in the OK Junior category. Lots and lots of people that could win this particular race. Interestingly enough, we had Dries van Langendonk, the newly signed McLaren Junior, winning the title despite already graduating to the OK Seniors for this race. So he didn't even compete, but Niklas Schaufler did have a bit of a weekend to forget, and he only had an outside shot at taking this title anyway. So yeah, very deserved from Van Langendonk there. Flawless all year long pretty much. On track, we had a local hero, Scott Marsh, using the opportunity with a pretty sick drive actually to take the win on home soil, and he'll probably be one to watch next week. We already talked about him last week as well, winning one of those Rotax races, so he is having a really good run of form. And then there's a bit of a separate storyline I wanted to highlight from this race, and that's James Anagnasiadis and Kenzo Craigie, the two Mercedes juniors battling for the Prema karting team. And I have to say, this duel was pretty fun to watch. It's not quite KNB versus Alex Powell just yet in terms of the quality and consistency with which they're fighting at the sharp end. Especially Anagnasiadis was a bit, hit or miss so far. I thought Craigie usually the better of the two, but this time out Anagnasiadis did have his number. And yeah, it was a really cool duel for the entire weekend, and definitely a pair we will probably see fighting a lot more going forward. In the OK category, we do have to highlight one of the guys, not even super relevant for the Feeder Series fans, but nonetheless, Joe Turney, just flawless all year long. He already won the European title, now he locked up Champions of the Future pretty much uncontested as well. And I mean, just given his recent performance, he would also be a pretty overwhelming favourite going into the World Championship. Although, of course, at an event like this, anything can happen. Nonetheless, he could do the unthinkable triple pretty much, and it's great to see. We do want to focus on the younger drivers though, and here it is actually another Fast Freddie, not Freddie Slater, but in fact Freddie Lloyd, who's giving a very, very good performance recently. Did secure P2 on the road. He was also the only one able to like remotely challenge Joe Tony over the course of the weekend, it felt like, so very good result there. And then last but not least, we had the aforementioned Dries van Langendonk debut, where he's now finally reunited with Forza Racing teammate Lewis Werrell. So they could continue their scrap. Werrell graduated going into the season already. And I have to say, great debut from Dries van Langendonk. It finished ahead of Werrell in the final with, I believe, P6 to P9. So it definitely didn't take him long to adjust, and I can't wait to see their duels continue. Anyway, we will see more from all of this next week in the World Championship, but for now, let's go to some car racing. We had a lot of F4 racing at the weekend, and we begin our journey in Europe with the Central European Formula 4 Championship. And here we do have Kirill Kutskov and local guy Max Karhan really trying their best to keep the title fight alive against Oscar Wurz going into the last round. But so far the Austrian has just remained consistent enough with another pair of P2s. He's got a 50 points lead going into the last round, so it is going to be very unlikely for anyone to steal this from him. But nonetheless, it is really cool to see, in particular, I think Max Karhan step up this much over the course of the season and, you know, really put up a good fight now. In Kirill Kutskov's case, he could have made a better claim to the title, but unfortunately he left crucial points on the table when he wrecked into Mikesh in a battle for P2, and I believe it was the second race. So he had a DNF, which you really can't afford this late into the championship, especially considering that obviously Oscar Wurz is really mainly winning the title at this point by having 0 DNFs in a not super messy, but you know, given the small grid size, these races are pretty messy, so he is doing a really solid job to just keep it clean weekend after weekend to bring home these points and ultimately the championship. But of course, much as we talked about with Fornaroli last week, it's not the most convincing way to win a title either. Otherwise, I do want to highlight a couple of new faces here with a quick driver spotlight, and the most interesting one out of those is 15-year-old Austrian Simon Schanz, who is new to the series and, as far as I could tell, just pretty new to racing, all things considered. I tried looking him up and I couldn't find a karting history. Now, that doesn't mean he's never done any karting, but at least this means he's never really competed in anything big, I don't think. And especially given this history, I thought he did really well this weekend. He was, you know, remotely on the pace, at least battling in the midfield. Yes, there was a couple of errors and everything creeping in as well. But overall, a really cool program, and he is here to stay as far as I could figure out from reading up a little. He has a full season ride lined up next season in this championship. So hopefully we can see him develop into a pretty good driver. It definitely looked very good for a debut. We also had Joanne Siconte, I forgot how to pronounce her name already, but it doesn't matter. Australian female driver who not quite as flashy as Schanz. I think he had a couple, you know, bigger moments over the course of the weekend, but also a couple of worse moments, so I guess that is fair. And she did actually match his personal best result of a P4 as well, and in her case, without any DNFs, so that was pretty good. Yes, she has a little bit of F4 experience. She did one round of the Australian F4 earlier the year, and at least with her, I could actually find out she did a lot of karting over in Australia, as you would expect. I don't know how well she did. Her results weren't anything impressive, but of course there's always a long list of potential caveats with these karting CVs, and I don't watch the Australian Championship, so this isn't for me to judge. Talking about the Australian F4, we also had another round there, and I am incredibly happy to report this championship has gone from, you know, pretty boring, not super interesting, James Pizik dominating every round with a ridiculous 9-race win streak, and we've now gone to an actually very competitive field, despite only a handful of new entries for the Malaysia round they had this time out. But all of these entries were super competitive compared to the Australian drivers, so it was really, really good to watch. Pizik's streak got snapped immediately, but make no mistake, he was also a bit unlucky. It's not like he just got found out or anything with the other drivers arriving. He was still fighting for podiums, fighting for wins, but it didn't quite work out for him, unfortunately. We also had the other Australians, Starty and Amadio. They struggled a little more this time out, especially Amadio couldn't really show a whole lot. Starty was still pretty decent, but it was really the newcomers stealing the show largely. We had massively unlucky Thiago Rodriguez, last year's Chinese F4 runner and one of those drivers who's gone a little missing over the course of the year, evidently struggling with budget a little if I had to guess, because he didn't have a full season program lined up. But it turns out, yes, we know he can drive these F4 cars pretty well, so naturally he was fighting for wins. He got one of them. He got, well, more or less fucked out of a win with mechanical issues ahead of the formation lap in one of the races, so a very good weekend from him overall. Then we had a very similar story for Cooper Webster, and we will talk about this in a little because he's one of the few GB4 graduates that are actually sort of doing something worth noting, and he's also gone missing for a while. But of course, again, with him, we also know he can drive those F4 cars pretty well, so again, no big surprise that he's doing well, much like Costa Taparis, I mean, in this case even worse. Kai Darianani did surprise me a little. I normally think he is one of these, you know, like eternal back markers that just have a lot more cash than skill. But here he did actually surprisingly well, I do have to say. All in all, I just want to say, if Evans GP can stick around for the rest of the season somehow, I don't know at all if that's a plan. I wouldn't assume it is. But this is really what the Australian F4 needs to go from, you know, pretty mediocre to actually a very good local F4 series. Then, I just already teased it, we did have a round of GB4, and here we have Linus Grandforce still comfortably leading the championship. He did get a beautiful wet weather win, but it is really F1 esports style. Lucas Blakeley, who looks like the best driver on the grid at this point in the year, consistently fighting for podiums no matter what. He is especially, I think, better in traffic than Grandforce. Grandforce has these weird races where it doesn't go right in quali or it doesn't go right on the opening lap, and then he has a tendency to just get stuck a little down in the midfield, whereas Blakeley seems to be really effective at getting out of the scrappy midfield. And yeah, I just really wish he could have done the full season. I hope he can, with this performance, find himself the budget for a full season ride next year. But of course, it's racing, it's tough, but I mean, yeah, we can just wish him luck in this sense, I think. We actually have Alicia Palmovsky now up in P2 in the standings with a double podium, despite Harry Burgoyne Jr. finally taking his first win of the season. But I mean, fair enough, it was only the reverse grid win. Both still have a mathematical chance of the championship, but I mean, we know how it is. It's just very unrealistic at this point. Especially with Harry Burgoyne Jr., I'm just still not convinced at all that he is all that relevant of a driver. Palmovsky, I hope we will see in F1 Academy next year, and then she can show what she's really made of. Another driver we want to highlight, Finn Harrison continues to look better race after race ever since getting his maiden win last time out especially. He now secured a double P2 here, so I am really liking just the very consistent, predictable improvement he has made so far over the course of the year, and I do expect this to continue going forward. Then, last but not least, we had a couple new faces entering the championship this time out. We have Alexander Misera. To be fair, I don't know him at all, and he was full on back marking throughout the entire weekend. So if any of you know something about him, let me know down in the comments, but I don't, and at least with what I've seen so far, I don't care either. But there was also Nick Ellis competing. Now Nick Ellis is currently doing Ginetta Juniors, or well, up to this weekend he's done Ginetta Juniors, and he's been pretty mediocre in these. Like, it's not been hugely impressive at all. So I have to say, he did kind of surprise me here. I think he did look a lot better in the open wheeler than he does in the closed cockpit cars he's normally driving. I'm very curious to see where this goes going forward. Anyway, time to talk about the two big championships in the quicker cars. Staying at Donington Park, but continuing with the quick cars, we had GB3 yet another round, and it is still Louis Sharp more or less just dominating the series. He is now back to proper domination mode on this particular weekend, stomping both of the regular grid races. Crucially, title rival Tymek Kucharczyk has made a key error in race 1, losing P2 on the last lap under no pressure whatsoever. Fortunately, he only spun down to P4, so not a huge points loss. And I mean, truth be told, in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't matter all that much. but I think it does show a tendency we've seen with Kucharczyk more or less all season long, where he is really quick, he is looking very competitive, especially compared to last year, but he is still just making a little too many errors. Like, these sorts of errors you can kind of afford in this championship, where you're quick enough, there's not so many people competing with you at the sharp end, so you don't lose out too much. If you make this sort of error in F3, you're not losing 2 positions, you're losing like 12. So I don't know, but he does need to sort this out going forward. I do think the raw pace is definitely there to do a really good job wherever he ends up next season. All of this actually now puts John Bennett up to P2 in the championship, which was a bit of a surprise for me to see. Obviously, I've said going into the season, I'm not hugely convinced, but he is doing quite well for himself all year long, it has to be said. I think it's still more on the quiet side of things, like more, not particularly flashy in terms of pace, but more consistently bringing home good results. But I mean, yeah, hats off there. Doing it in this championship is pretty difficult, so he is clearly doing quite well for himself. Louis Sharp did get a bit of a reality check though, even though yes, he was stomping the normal grid races, both of them, but in the reverse grid race he did come up against his debuting young teammate, Fast Freddie Slater, who he could not pass all race long and actually had to settle for P5 right behind him. Slater did what Slater does best, adjusted rapidly, and honestly, yeah, first of all beating his teammate like reverse grid merchant Rosion in both the regular grid races, even though Rosion was the one who ended up winning the reverse grid race. And he got a podium on track in the very wet second race. Yes, unfortunately he did get penalized after the race, but I think all in all this shows that yes, I mean, it confirms what we already know, that Freddie is a phenomenal driver all around, can adjust to, it looks like, anything pretty quickly. Obviously, we remember him putting it on pole very early on in his F4 career, stomping basically all of his Ginetta Junior races from the very first one, winning a season of European KZ2 karting on his first season. So yeah, he can really do all of this. This kid is going to F1. There's a couple other interesting kids who are hoping to go to F1 though, where it is looking a lot less likely, but still very interesting. And I want to highlight the 2 American boys competing in this series. First of all, because I think it's a really cool and interesting dynamic with this like Arden VRD crossover, whatever thing they've got going on, partnership. We now see these drivers coming over to compete in Europe, and obviously these are, at least in relation to their age, basically among the best drivers the US currently has to offer. We've had obviously Nikita Johnson, now he's like 3rd or 4th round already in Europe, but also now USF Juniors champ Max Taylor coming over to compete in this. USF Juniors champ, and I think 3rd in the USF 2000s if I remember correctly, so phenomenal season all around from him as well. Also only 15. And I do want to say his debut actually went pretty well. He wasn't, you know, particularly quick or anything, much like Johnson so far whenever he's racing in Europe. Obviously, all the tracks are new and everything, I understand. But with Taylor, I want to highlight that he was looking particularly racy. Like, he was producing some really entertaining battles and things. So a kid definitely doesn't lack confidence, I think is safe to say. And he also got a really solid P5 in the reverse grid race. Yes, once again, he also got penalized after the race and didn't really take any points home, but still, it does show the potential that's clearly there. Last but not least, one quick shout out, since we're talking about Americans, Colin Queen, one of the other GB4 graduates, actually doing things, and I'm really happy he is here, and he is actually, you know, sort of proving the concept of GB4 in the quicker series by taking his maiden podium on the road in the 3rd race, but yet again, he also got a post-race penalty. There was really a lot of those going around this week, and always a little bit of a mess to see. I missed them way too often, and you know, just write down the result I was seeing with my own eyes, and then you check a couple hours later and get very disappointed. But oh well, this is junior racing for you. And then last but not least, the biggest of the championships racing this week, FRECA, the Formula Regional European Championship. And here we are back. In the first race in particular, we had the very classic by now, Rafa Camara versus Tuukka Taponen, bringing home P1 and P2, Camara back on top, Taponen right behind, and basically just the same kind of racing we've seen all season long. The second race though turned into an absolutely very entertaining but very messy wet weather affair, and the chaos immediately started in the first corner with Taponen sending it a bit too deep into Rafa Camara, taking himself out and spinning Camara down to the back of the pack. Camara then actually went on to do a pretty ridiculous comeback. Yes, massively aided by safety cars, but still, and he recovered all the way to P9, so he even still scored despite all of this. Bit of a mental race all around really, and a very entertaining one to watch, despite the, tricky racing situation at Imola normally. As always, I do want to highlight the rest of the Prema garage, because I still think James Wharton versus Yugo Kucharczyk is one of the most interesting, especially regarding expectations going into the season, team duels we've got going on the grid right now, where Wharton is still more or less dominating Yugo Kucharczyk, got another pair of podiums here, so he is really not just good compared to Yugo Kucharczyk, but I think James Wharton is comfortably looking like the best James Wharton we've seen so far. But I do want to highlight that at least in Yugo's case, he did show up in the wet and actually made the most of the wet race by taking a pretty good result on track here. They're still too rare for him, but at least I think we are slowly going in the right direction. I said it in a previous episode, I just hope McLaren doesn't lose patience with him. I think the underlying potential obviously hasn't just gone this year just because he is having a bit of a slow season all around. Then we had Noah Stromstad, who I think by now we can say is almost like the revelation of the season, at least in terms of the rookies. He is now leading the official rookie championships, yet thanks to taking yet another second place this weekend. And honestly, this is also just proving that RPM is one of these low-key, really good racing outfits that are just solid. They're not championship contenders or anything, but they do provide a package, and they provide it consistently enough for the drivers to just develop properly. Look at Santiago Ramos over in F3 now. He's not the best driver by any means, he's not the most flashy driver by any means, but he's just really solid, and those seem to be the sort of drivers that RPM attracts. I don't know what it is about them. Then we had Dorian Pan, who unfortunately so far we've not really had to talk about because she's been a bit too bad so far this year. And here she finally got so close to the points, running in P11, only to then retire with mechanical failure during a safety car, which was really sad to see. And with her, really the big question is, and I don't know, is there anything official about who is running these cars? Obviously they are entered as Iron Dames entries. Going into the season, I think most people suspect they'd be run by Prema again, but at least given the car's performance, it is really difficult to imagine that these are also set up by the same guys setting up these Prema machines. So if you know something that I don't, please let me know down in the comments. Let's clear this up together. If these are Prema run cars, I think she's having a pretty underwhelming season, even if of course the expectations were pretty low anyway. It is her first year in single seaters after all. If these are independently run Iron Dames cars, then I think she's probably doing very well, and it's just pretty difficult to judge all around. One last neat storyline to end on. Obviously we do want to finish on a high note. We have Roman Belinsky back from injury, and he did very well on his comeback drive with a double scoring weekend in Trident, which is not an easy feat by any means. And what a year he has had, from winning Formula Regional Oceania Championship in the winter to then missing most of the summer. After starting the regular season really well, he obviously had his sustained injuries and had to miss most of the year so far. I am really glad he's back. I hope him not getting a good championship position doesn't hinder his career development, and I do hope to see him in F3 next season. Anyway, that was it from me. There was lots and lots of driver announcements regarding F2 and other series as well, but we will talk about those next week when they've actually raced. Otherwise, let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments, and I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.